We're going to finish up with a keynote address. 6 facts, 2 myths, a rumor, and 1 big lie. The real estate industry 10 years from now by Dr. Lowell Duke Kuehn. Duke's background is as a sociologist and a professor at a small liberal arts college. He's been actively involved in organizations as a strategic planner for 25 years, the last several being almost exclusively in the real estate field. You can read more about him in the program, but most important thing to know is that he's a bit of a smart aleck and you're going to enjoy his brand of humor. Please join me in welcoming Duke.
Well, I'm delighted to be here today. There are 2 things that are really fun to do. One are commencement addresses at universities, and the other are keynote speeches at summits like this, because you get to be Jim Cramer for 45 minutes and kind of just talk about anything you want to, and then you get to go home. I should warn you, I was in the restroom a few minutes ago, and the zipper to my slacks here broke, so there's the potential for a wardrobe malfunction here of a significant order. Those of you who are old enough to remember Jim Morrison of the Doors, I could face indecent exposure charges in Hershey, Pennsylvania, so watch out. I am delighted to be here. I have some associations that go back. I spent a lot of time in Harrisburg, probably about 15 years ago, when the Pennsylvania School Board Association brought me in to do a study of strategic planning in the state. And I'm one of the few people who's ever spent more than probably 1 day in Red Lion. So I've had a little experience and a little bit of fun here. And then more recently, I'm proud to admit that one of my clients is NAICIR, and Robin Zellers is both a great client and a good friend. So I appreciate the invitation, and put a little bit of thought into this, and hopefully by the end of the day, I will have stimulated some thought. Now, usually keynotes are given at the beginning of the day to sort of set the keynote for what we're going to talk about, but I guess things are done a little bit different in this part of Pennsylvania, and so we're going to do the keynote right before the cocktail party. So I'm going to try and set that up as much as I possibly can, and guarantee you that anybody that would stand in the way of a drink at this stage of the game is not anybody I'd want to sit around and listen to. But I am going to talk a little bit about the future of the American economy and the impact it has on the business that you do in real estate. I am not an economist, and I am not a forecaster. I'm a strategic planner. That means that I get to travel all over the country every year, working mostly with commercial real estate firms, networks, and associations, helping them plan for the future. That gives me a kind of in-the-trench view of all of this. I'm not going to talk from 35,000 feet because I just can't get up that high, but I do know what you and your colleagues are talking about, and I can give you a report about what's going on in this country. I fly over 100,000 miles each year. This year I've been in Seattle, Portland, Los Angeles, Las Vegas, Phoenix, Chicago, Cleveland, Harrisburg, Northern New Jersey, New York, Miami, Raleigh. Pretty good representation of what's going on in this nation. Montreal, so Canada also. And I'll try and give you a sense of what I'm hearing and what I'm picking up. So let's get started. I'm not a futurist, I'm a forecaster. If I could predict the future, I probably would have retired a long time ago after I bought all that first issued Microsoft stock. Didn't do it. So I'm trying to figure out what's going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years, and I do that for the purposes of advising my clients. What are the strategic issues they face? What kind of decisions and choices do they need to make? So let's get started. Fact number 1, demographics do not lie. Prepare yourself for the most significant shift in ownership of properties and firms in the history of human civilization. The impact of the baby boom means that the concentration of ownership in a large bubble, of which I represent part of it, is in the process of going to shift, and that's going to shift to my sons and daughters, and your sons and daughters. It's astounding to me. When I first started to do strategic planning with firms 25 years ago, most of the issues had to do with market and growth. Today, it's all about succession and exit strategies. That's happening wherever you go, whatever industry you want to look at, large or small. What you're seeing is transfers in ownership, transfers in management, transfers in leadership. And that has a couple of implications. Not only is the act of transferring that ownership significant, but you're transferring it to a generation or two generations that in many ways have values and lifestyles that are different than mine. If nothing else, that has profound implications for you in terms of marketing and in terms of sales. You're not talking to the same clients that you were 20 years ago. You're not talking to me, you're talking to my daughter, you're talking to my son. And while they are very similar to me, if you knew Matt and Allison and Aaron, you would know that there's pretty much the progeny of myself and my wife. However, they're different. The things that they value are different, and the things that they attend to and prioritize are a little bit different. Just as competitive, just as entrepreneurial, just as ambitious, but there's some things that they are concerned about that are just a little bit different than what you and I necessarily reflect on. That's going to be a big change for us. Associated with that demographic shift is the fact that the profile of those people who make decisions about real estate will mirror those shifts in American population dynamics. Diversity is no longer a theory or a concept. It's true. As you know, in the state of California, probably now or very soon, the majority population will be Hispanic. Spanish could very easily not be a secondary, but a primary language for business in Southern California. It's interesting, if you read this week's edition of Sports Illustrated, look at the back page in which there's a very impassioned plea for the Soviet Union to change its policies and procedures about lesbian, gay, transgender, bisexual lives. The idea that he never once explains what the acronym LGBT stands for tells you how significantly our society has changed. Whatever your opinions are on these things, whatever your opinion on diversity, I guarantee you the population that's sitting here right now is very different demographically than the population that was in this room 10 years ago, and even more so 10 years from now. So if you're used to doing business with me, an older white guy, the probability that's likely to occur is not going to continue into the future. This is a diverse society. And so the idea that there's a single ethnicity or a single religion or a single anything that reflects who we are is just not going to be true. Fact number 3, you all have a job. I've been listening to what you said this morning. I've listened to brokers and appraisers and bankers. Everybody that's involved in the real estate industry is still going to be doing work, but you're going to be doing different kinds of work. Now, here's where you might disagree with me, and that's your prerogative, right? I'm telling you what I'm seeing. I could be wrong. I'm not betting on these things. There is a continued need for professional real estate services, but it's just that. You're looking at an industry that slowly but surely is shifting from sales to service. You're looking to an industry that's surely shifting from commissions to fees. That, however you consider that evolution, the fact of the matter is clients are what are going to drive that. Clients are going to drive it 2 ways. Clients are going to drive it because they don't like paying commissions. They are willing to pay fees for a service rendered. What's interesting is some clients in the real estate business are actually looking for you to kick back a portion of those fees. You know that. Clients don't need many of you to do what you did in the past. They don't need to find buyers or sellers or properties. The internet and a whole variety of other mechanisms through the internet and electronically are a perfect source for people to find the information. If I want to find a house, or I want to find an office, or I want to find an office building, or just a piece of dirt, it's not very hard for me to go out on the internet and do that pretty quickly, and there are people who are willing for free to help me do that. So your ability to provide that service to me is not necessary anymore. What I do need is when we get into the transaction, when we are closing the deal, I am going to need your services. I'm going to need you to help me with the complexities, the legalities, and the financing of all of that. Not going to go away. The valuation experts are going to become much, much more important than they are right now, and they're important now, but even more important because I can't do that on my own. I can't establish those things on my own. Anything that requires analysis, anything that requires the ability to do complex kinds of analysis and computation, anything that requires looking at the legal implications of these things, I'm going to need that. But I'm probably going to not need you to find properties for me, and I'm probably not going to need you to go out and find somebody to buy it or sell it or lease it or rent it. A fact is that consolidation is found at every level in the United States. You probably remember from your Economics 101 the iron rule of oligarchies, and it's true. Just look at newspapers, just look at the airline industry, just look at anything you want to. And what you've seen in your lifetime is the consolidation of many competitors into a smaller number of competitors. Now, it stops short of monopoly, thank heavens, but the fact of the matter is my options to fly into Harrisburg are fewer today than they were 15 years ago when I first came here. And what we found is with that consolidation, airfares haven't gone down, they've actually gone up. The process has become less competitive rather than more competitive in some ways. Consolidation has occurred in everything, and you certainly see it within the real estate industry. In my area of specialization, which is commercial, what you've seen over the last few years is the consolidation of networks and associations to the larger and larger conglomerations in which C.B. Richard Ellis is the big dog. And then comes Jones Lang and Cushman and a bunch of others. But there are fewer networks and associations out there than there were when I started doing this 15 years ago with commercial real estate. It's consolidation and consolidation at every level. And so smaller banks get swallowed up into larger banks, and smaller newspapers and broadcasting systems get swallowed up into larger ones. They give the appearance of still being locally based, but you all know that the headquarters is someplace else. Now, there is a counter trend, and the banking industry demonstrates that. In fact, my good friend Gary Nalbandian and Metro Bank demonstrated is that local community banks can arise in that vacuum. But they have to stave off the fact that they soon become desirable candidates for consolidation in their own regards. So there's always going to be a place for the boutique real estate firm, but the degree to which the boutique real estate firm can compete against these larger consolidated entities is questionable. We'll see. So I'm not writing them off, but certainly you could go through a community, you go through the yellow pages from the phone book 20 years ago and see that there are a lot less people providing commercial or residential real estate services today than there are 20 years ago than there are today. Consolidation, consolidation, consolidation. That consolidation, by the way, goes hand in hand with my earlier point about commissions to fees. Because what happens is that increasingly as things consolidate, you're not working for Gary Nalbandian or Robin Zellers. You're working for a corporate entity. You're an employee. And you're treated like an employee. Now, the interesting thing is, this connects with an earlier point, is that as you look at the generational shift in vocations and occupations, there are a lot of people coming up the line, my kids and your kids included, who don't necessarily find that shift undesirable. A couple of years ago, the National Association of Realtors asked me to come in and do focus groups with new realtors who'd gotten their CCIM designation. Most of them were in their 20s, college educated, smart, professional, capable. It's not easy to get a CCIM. It takes a lot of work and discipline, particularly early in your career. Now, I've been thinking about this for a long time. I mean, I've been teaching younger students all my life. I kind of had a sense of what these changes in values were. I significantly underestimated how different their perception of what it meant to be a commercial real estate professional was than what I thought. I know it was shifting, but it was shifting significantly. And the idea that they might be a salaried employee, recognizing that they wanted to be compensated at high levels, the idea that they might be a lifelong employee now, they recognized they were likely to go through 2 or 3 jobs. They were likely to recognize they weren't going to be making commissions. And interestingly enough, all that stuff we taught them about playing soccer and being cooperative and everybody getting an award for trying in kindergarten, that shows up 25 years later. They want to work in teams. They want to work collaboratively. I'm drawing no judgment about this. I'm simply saying this is happening in our society. What motivated your workers or brokers now are not necessarily the same things that are going to motivate the people who you work with in the next few years. Certainly not in the future. Note that the consolidation occurs at every level. It's certainly occurring nationally, but it's occurring locally too. Watch for regionalization. Is that increasingly people are recognizing that business is well done at a regional level. that what goes on in northern New Jersey and Hackensack has an implication on what's going on here, because we're connected by interstate corridors or other logistical chains. So the strangest kinds of places can be connected regionally that you wouldn't necessarily think about. I'm going to open probably some sore wounds from the last election, but I got to tell the truth here. There is an unfinished national debate, a referendum about the future of American economic and social policy that must be decided. It has to be decided. It can't continue. Essentially, a set of policies that began within the administration of FDR and continue through today, and were significantly modified by Ronald Reagan. That debate is not resolved, and it comes down very simply. This nation has to decide, are we going to provide more services at higher taxes? Are we going to look like Europe? Or are we going to provide fewer services and lower taxes? What we want to do now is provide services with lower taxes. Can't be done. Sequestration is a very good experiment for American citizens. You may not feel it yet, but I guarantee if it continues, you will start feeling it. The question is, who's going to lose what service? Who's going to give up what to pay lower taxes or no taxes? I have my own opinion about this, and I'm sure you do too. What I know is this: at some point in time, that debate has to be resolved. It will take America in one of two very different directions, and the implications of one direction or the other are significant for what you do and for what I do and for us as citizens. But it is unsupportable to continue having the debate and not resolving it in some way. I gotta go back. The gridlock in D.C. is an anomaly. And it comes not from the fact that Republicans are more partisan than they've ever been, or Democrats are more partisan than they've ever been. It comes from the fact that we as an electorate can't make up our decision. We've had a series of significant elections that basically, going back to the Gore-Bush, are 50-50 calls. When the nation is split 50-50, it's very difficult to set a course for the future. And whatever the course is, I guarantee you, once it's decided, is better than the course that's stuck, that's in gridlock. I voted for Obama. I like Obama. Doesn't mean I'm not disappointed in him in some ways, but I'll tell you this. Romney got himself in trouble for that speech he gave about 48%. He was right. Think about it. If the United States doesn't deal with the inequality and the distribution of income in this nation, and you have a growing and growing underclass, so we look more and more like Great Britain all the time, and we do, what's going to happen? Those people who are in that underclass are not going to vote for Republicans. They're not going to vote for people to give me benefits to become richer. They're going to vote just to hold on to the services that they have. So somehow or another, we got to figure this stuff out, and it takes leadership. I'll argue that both Republicans and Democrats have failed in that regard for a whole variety of reasons. We've got to resolve this, and I'll give you some more points on that in a minute. This is hardly a surprise. You know it already because you all got them sitting in front of you in your pocket. We are now controlled by electronic devices. I've got a cell phone that's ringing in my pocket right now. I got an iPad right over there. I've got a bunch of other devices that I use in terms of doing my business and recreating and everything else. Well, that's good in some ways. I mean, I enjoy it. I'm kind of a geek in that regards. It's not necessarily for the better. If technology is largely used in business to help make decisions and communicate more effectively, I'm going to argue that I'm not sure that it's done either one of those things very well. The only thing that all this technology has done is allowed us to accumulate more information, much of it untested, faster. So very quickly, if I want to go buy a stock or if I'm interested in investing in something, I can find out lots of things quickly, much more so than I could have 10 years ago, when it might have taken me weeks to accumulate that information. But all that information coming in all that fast, much of it unedited or unreviewed. You see, what's happened is technology has gotten better and better and better, but the human brain has not changed at all in the last 25 years. I'm no better at processing information. I'm no better at making decisions. I'm no better at using this flow of information. In fact, I can easily be overwhelmed with it today. Communication is worse in some ways. People used to actually talk to each other face to face. And I know a lot of places where people get in enormous trouble because they think they can only have to communicate by email or by some sort of text system. It doesn't work. You can't replace a very, very profound human type of behavior with technology. Does it do it faster? Does it do it more efficiently? Yes. Does it do it more accurately? Does it do it more effectively? Not a chance. If you don't do anything else, get a copy of Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow. It is a very difficult book. But Kahneman, who won a Nobel Prize a few years ago, summarizes all the current research on cognition, all the recent research about how the human brain works. And we're beginning to know much more about that and recognizing how much of that is tied to the evolution of the human species. What got us to be able to organize and become complex societies and organizations 40,000 years ago, that mechanism, that machinery, those tools are programmed, hardwired into us. And that provides opportunities, but it also provides limitations as we deal with the electronic world. You read Kahneman's book, and I guarantee you will never think about making decisions in the same way again. And you will probably modify the way in which you make decisions. Okay, those were all the facts. My first myth. You've heard some discussion, probably most of the discussion today has been around this point. Has the economy recovered from the recession? Kinda. There isn't any question that things are better now than they were a few years ago. There isn't any question. Wherever I go, I see more business, I see more transactions, see people making more money. We are climbing out of a huge hole. But there's still a lot of unsettling issues out there. Big money is still sitting on the sidelines. Everywhere I go, it's identified that the people who have control over capital are not yet confident enough to let go of that capital and spend it on development projects or a lot of other things. So as long as the big money sits on the sidelines, we've not fully recovered. The banks have discovered prudence. 6 years ago, I could have gone in there and gotten a nice home mortgage loan for my driver's license. Today, all of a sudden, no, we've got to be real careful about mortgage lending. Okay. Well, you've got a pent-up demand for housing, you've got a new interest, and you've got some income kicking in. People can't get mortgage loans. Underemployment diminishes buying power. I'm going to hit on this theme a couple of times. The minimum wage in the United States, it's interesting we're having this meeting right after Labor Day because there's been some discussion about this recently. Minimum wage in the United States is $7.25. Okay? Average American work weeks are going to decline because many of my clients are looking at Obamacare and saying, okay, the way I can beat Obamacare is not employ people full time, I'll just employ them 25 hours a week. Well, 25 hours a week at $7.25, that's a monthly income of, I think, of $725. I might have done my arithmetic wrong. It's not very much money. We're talking about a single parent living on $725 a month. I just looked it up. The average cost of a one-bedroom apartment in this market is $550. So if I'm a single parent with a kid, $550 of my $725 goes out the window right away. That leaves me what, $175 to feed, pay for gas, pay for utilities? The average utilities for a one-bedroom apartment in this market is like, I think, $260, something like that. So it's gone. It's gone. You say, well, wait a second. Yeah, but I mean, there's... Last year, for the first time in the history of, I'm sure, humankind, at least modern humankind, among women under the age of 30, more children were birthed to unmarried mothers than to married mothers. There are more single-parent mothers out there than there below the age of 30 than there are married mothers. I've got a daughter in that circumstance. Excuse me. How's my daughter going to raise my granddaughter if she's making $725 a month? Working 25. I guarantee you, she's got health care. That's good news. But probably nothing else. Who's going to pick up the tab? Well, I'm either going to pick it up, my wife and I are going to pick it up, or you're going to pick it up. Taxpayers are going to pick it up. We've got to get this figured out. Myth number 2, the economy is headed for another recession. I don't think so. I see no signs of that, unless you're a real doomsday person. The reason why is because, and somebody talked about it earlier today, what was a fairly natural cycle in American economy, and certainly in American real estate, what was a fairly natural cycle that hit its kind of bad spot around 2008 or 9, hit the skids because a bubble burst. And the bubble burst came because of super hyperinflation in the mortgage market. And that was driven by a single phenomenon that really didn't have much to do with the economy. It had to do with greed. Greed at every level. There's people in Wall Street that probably ought to be in jail, and there's certainly homeowners who somehow or another got dollar signs in their eyes and did a bunch of things supported by unscrupulous lenders that put us in the crash of a housing market. And if you didn't think so before, and certainly you all realize that the housing market is the backbone of the American economy in some ways. So I don't think we're going to see that happening, and I hope we're not going to see that happening. And I don't think we're headed for another recession. I don't necessarily know that, I'm pretty sure we're not going to get back to where we were in 2007, or certainly not very fast. It's going to take a while. But a recovery is under the way. Are we fully recovered? No. Rumor number 1, and it was good to hear Jeffrey Walters talk about this morning. I still believe, I've been saying this for several years, and I just checked the internet. There aren't a lot of people agree with me. I think there's a real danger of inflation lurking in the background. There is all this pent-up money. Some of it pent up because investors are simply holding on to it because they don't know what's going to happen with Obamacare and the Mideast and everything else. There's all this money that's sitting on the sidelines. There's all this stimulus money that got pumped out there in some ways, which in some ways has still not been spent. And there's incredibly low interest rates. Historically unprecedented interest rates. Well, it's been a while, but my Microeconomics 101, having lived through the Carter years, tells me that when you got a lot of money that pours into the market and you've got incredibly low interest rates, something's got to give, and it generally gives in the form of inflation. Will we return to the Carter year interest rates of 18%? I certainly hope not, but it's not an impossibility. Certainly some rebound, some increase in interest rates is pretty likely, and I think there's a pretty good chance of some inflation down the line. But I classify that as a rumor. What's the big lie? Well, the big lie is America's failing, and that's just not true. We've been through some tough times, and we have some tough times ahead of us, but the fact of the matter is that if you go back to the old concept of competitive advantage, the United States faces and possesses an enormous competitive advantage against everybody else on the face of the earth. Let's go through this briefly. Europe is in disarray. The concept of a European Union seems to be less likely all the time, and the actions of the European nations over the last several months demonstrate they are a long way from being able to operate with any degree of coordination in the sense that this nation can and does. And it's just a question of time, I think, before Britain or somebody else says, hey, we're out of here. I don't know how much longer Germany can continue to prop up the EU or the Euro financially. Big troubles ahead there. China faces its own problems. Everybody talks about the fact that China is facing at some point an economic crash. The question is how hard. But the fact of the matter is the enormous growth that you've seen in China over the last few years is probably not going to continue. And there's a whole variety of financial issues that I'm not competent to really discuss, but would suggest to me that there's a lot of policy issues that are unresolved in China that are going to come home to roost. If you wanted to bet on somebody, I'd bet on Japan and the Pacific Rim, but the fact of the matter is that Japan faces the same problem that caused them to get involved in the Second World War. They don't have any kind of unified structure. They can't connect up in terms of manufacturing or anything else with Southeast Asia. So the fact of the matter is, while they're vibrant and they're powerful, they're disorganized, and they will continue to be so. Oops. South America and Africa are resource rich, but they're a long way from challenging the United States. And the Middle East is facing a reckoning somewhere down the line, but the fact of the matter is that the dependence on oil will decrease significantly over the next 20 years, I would predict. And when dependence on oil from the Middle East begins to decline, those Middle Eastern countries are essentially going to recede back into what they were. And they weren't a whole lot in terms of political force 50 or 60 years ago. Our struggles are real. We have lacked political leadership for several years and a national resolve, and I put this on our shoulders, not the politicians, to make the tough decisions that I've talked about before. We have perpetuated a myth for our children and our grandchildren that as Americans we can have it all. Well, we know that's not true. My kids are not going to be able to afford or easily get the kind of housing that I was able to get or the financing for it, particularly when they're already saddled with enormous student loans. The cost of higher education in the United States, if you haven't looked at it recently, and if you've got a kid in college or going to college, you know what I'm talking about. The cost of a good college education in the United States is out of reach for almost everybody. That's not a good sign. That's not healthy. But we perpetuated this myth that our kids are going to have the same life that we are. They're not. They're going to have less of a life than we are. Now, is it going to be awful? No. American standard of living is going to be considerably above the rest of the world, probably for a long time, largely because of the competitive advantages I talked about before. But the fact of the matter is, we as Americans are going to have to learn to live with a little bit less. Not an easy decision, but probably one that's going to happen. At some point, we have to decide that sacrifice is demanded. I recently read a book by Jake Tapper, the CNN correspondent, called The Outpost. If you haven't read The Outpost, please read it after Kahneman's book. It's a story about an outpost, a combat outpost in Afghanistan. You know, I don't know much about the war in Afghanistan. I really don't, and there's not a whole lot of reporting about it. You read that book, and I guarantee you the first person you see in a military uniform who you think's been in Afghanistan, you're going to go up and say, "Thank you very much." See, the implications of an all-voluntary military make it very easy for me not to think very much about this stuff. My kids aren't going off to war. Somebody else is. I give them credit for doing that. But I don't give them near enough credit. We have no idea the level of adversity that the American military is going through right now. No idea. Until you read a book like The Outpost. And when you read it, you're going to say a prayer tonight for every single person who's doing a tour over there, some for the second, third time. We become a nation that not only thinks that we can have everything, but that we don't really have to sacrifice for it. If you use the Tom Brokaw concept of the greater generation, my parents' generation, the Depression taught them a hard lesson, that you have to pay for it, that you have to sacrifice for it. We're willing to engage in foreign wars, we're willing to engage in all sorts of internal activities, and the fact of the matter is, as long as it doesn't bother me, as long as I don't feel it, it's okay. And you know that's exactly the last thoughts that the lobster has as you turn up the water in the pot. Is if we become complacent about what it means to be an American citizen, if we become complacent about the sacrifices that we need to make or that we're asking other people to make for us, then I don't think we have the same nation that we've had for the last 200 and some years. If you're willing to make that sacrifice, I believe that is a definition of leadership for all of us. It's the willingness to set aside my personal interest for the good of all of us, what it means to be an American citizen. What kind of society do I want to live in? What quality of life do I want for all citizens, not just for myself? And what am I willing to do to cause that to occur? If you say, well, all this is going to happen and I'm not going to pay any more taxes for it, I don't think that's very realistic. I'm not saying, however, that I should continue to pay taxes and taxes for unfettered and unregulated privileges handed out to everybody. We've got to make a tough decision about what we want to use taxes for and how we want to spend them. We're not failing. The real challenge, that's my granddaughter, Larkin Daly. She just started 6th grade the other day, and that's our dog, Megan. The real challenge is, can we continue to sustain a society that will allow her to pursue her dreams without the burden of crushing debt, without diminished earning power, and without excessive taxes? That's not an impossible recipe either. It can be done. But as I said before, we're going to have a hard and long internal debate about these things, and we're going to have to make decisions, and ultimately we're going to have to vote people into office who have the courage to make and support those decisions. I have my own preferences about this. I suspect you do too. It doesn't make any difference to me. I'm an American. I have a right to my opinion. You have a right to yours. What's important as an American, though, is that we come to some agreement about that. There has been a significant shift in the debate about American public policy that's decidedly unhealthy. I didn't put it in here. I have another slide that I frequently use in these presentations, in which is a picture of Bill O'Reilly and a picture of Keith Olbermann. Because I consider both of those people, and a number of others on Fox and on MSNBC, to be the real culprits here. So I grew up in a society where the art of politics was the art of compromise. We recognized that we needed to give and take to be able to weave some sort of path to move forward. I did not grow up in a politics of confrontation. But if you watch MSNBC for 30 minutes, and if you watch Fox for 20 minutes, I guarantee you will believe that the nature of political debate is to get two people with opposing positions to stand up and yell at each other. That's what you see in the halls of Congress right now. A bunch of inexperienced legislators who believe that the way in which you craft social policy is to take a strong position and yell at the other person, accuse them ultimately of treason. It doesn't work that way. All democracies, historically, succeed on the basis of the fact that people learn how to compromise, that they learn how to find the middle path. The fact of the matter is America still basically has political opinions that conform to a bell curve. But that's not what you see presented in the press. That's not what you see presented on television. You see the extremes, the two ends of the bell curve. That's not where foreign policy is going to be shifted, because this side and that side are never going to come to agreement with each other. The agreement in the American political process, whether you do it locally or whether you do it nationally, has always been right in the center, where your differences and my difference can ultimately be reconciled in some ways. If I could do two things to increase the ability of Americans to make good decisions, the first thing I would do is I'd take Olbermann and Riley off the air. The second thing I'd do is require everybody to take a course in basic logic. What's interesting is logic isn't taught very much anymore. But the fact of the matter, the ability to weigh and reason a logical argument gets rid of a lot of the silly stuff that you see going on in Washington, D.C., and Harrisburg, and Olympia, and every place else. It can be done, and it will be done. It's inevitable. It's going to take the leadership to do it. That's it. That's what I have to share with you. I don't necessarily expect you to agree with me, but what I've tried to do is to prompt you to think a little bit about where this nation is going and where you want it to go. Understand you're in business. Understand that your number one priority of being here today is to think about, how can I conduct my business? That's what I do. I help you as a strategic planner plan for the future. But what I'm trying to identify here is that there are deep issues, not necessarily problems, but deep issues that we as American citizens need to resolve. And if we have the will and the courage and the intelligence to resolve those, I think we can continue to see America be a great nation for a long time. The reason why I'm never very negative about the United States is because I'm a bit of a historian. You know, things have been worse. I only have to go, 25, 30 miles down the road to Gettysburg. This nation split itself apart, plus 130, 40 years ago. That can happen. We had a civil war in this nation. We've had some other major conflicts in our nation. But once again, we found our way. We found a way to make that happen. So I'm going to take a few questions here, and then I'm not going to stand in the way of anybody's beer or cocktail, but I'm hoping that I prompted a couple of questions here. Anybody got a comment or a question they want to add to all of this? Yes, sir.
What's going to make Americans unite if we're so divided now? What's going to change?
There has to be, what's going to make Americans unite? The same thing that's made Americans unite in the past. There has to be a common vision. That's what leaders are about. Leaders are able to identify a common vision that we can each buy into. I might not buy all of it, you might not buy all of it, but the fact of the matter is we can buy the center of this vision. And we say, we as Americans are going to build this kind of society, and we're going to do these kinds of things. There has not been a capable leader who's articulated a vision like that in a long time. That vision has to be articulated. I don't know where it comes from. I would suggest that it come from all of us and be summoned up. Interesting to listen to all the debate about, discussion about the 50th anniversary of Martin Luther King's I Had a Dream speech, which is a much more significant document now than it was 50 years ago when it was first released. But that's a good example. What happens when Americans are presented with a vision that they can buy into that's not just good for them, but good for all of us. Particularly, it's good for our children. Consistently, the question as a strategic planner you have to ask yourself is the same thing that motivated me to put up my slide of Larkin. The decisions that I need to make are not about me, they're about her. I want to make sure she has the opportunity to live a life that's fulfilling as I have. I'm coming to the end of my career, and I have many, many reasons to be thankful and feel blessed, particularly being an American citizen. I want to make sure that doesn't get lost somewhere, and I particularly want to make sure it doesn't get lost out of my own selfishness, my own greed, my own self-interest. I've had my shot here. I want to make sure that she gets her shot and her kids get her shot. So you need a common vision that brings us together around that says, what are we going to do for her? Thank you.
Thanks, Duke. Certainly gave us plenty to think about. Join me thanking our sponsors, NAICIR, Weinstein Realty Advisors, R.S. Mowry & Sons, Rhodes & Sinan, Metro Bank, Smith Land Improvement Corporation, Shipley Energy, ePower Solutions, as well as CAEDC and Creedic. Thank you all.